In this video, I'd like to demonstrate how we have to configure our BNC adapter in order to make DC measurements on the oscilloscope. So, as you can see on the channel 1 and channel 2, there's these two jumpers, these blue rectangle looking plastic. So these make a connection between two pins. You will see those pins when I remove it. So there's 3 pins, and you can see on the label above a pair of pins, it says AC for the left 2 pair and DC for the right 2 pair. Now what we want to do is place the jumper onto the right 2 pair of pins where it says DC. Once we make that connection, channel 1 on the oscilloscope terminal is configured to make DC measurements or have DC coupling. Now we can do the same thing for channel 2. And there we go. That's how we have our BNC adapter configured to make DC measurements or have DC coupling for both channel 1 and channel 2 terminals for the oscilloscope. Now I'd like to introduce the oscilloscope probe. You should have 2 of them in your lab kits. The main use of the oscilloscope probe is for measuring signals and DC voltages. Now looking at the oscilloscope probe, we can see that it has this part right here where we actually connect the probe to the circuit where we'd like to measure signals or voltages. It has a retractable piece to it, so you have to pull it back in order to release the hook, and we'd like to connect that hook to where we want to measure. It has this ground wire. We have to connect the ground wire to a point that already has an established ground on the circuit so that we can get a proper reading on the probe, since we are reading voltages. And it has the connector in order to connect it to the BNC adapter or a terminal. That pretty much makes up the oscilloscope probe. It does have another feature on it. It's called attenuator, and right now it's set to 1x, and that's all we need to care about. We don't have to switch it or anything like that, but just keep it on 1x. Having a closer look at the BNC adapter, we can see that there's 2 labels on the terminals, channel 1 and channel 2. Channel 1 and channel 2 are dedicated for the oscilloscope probes. So what we'd like to do is we'd like to insert this into those terminals, and you can see there's a small circle on each terminal. Now, if we look at the probe carefully at the connection point, we can see that there's this like long groove right here. So what we would like to do is align this long groove with the circle right here on the terminal. And once we align it, it goes in perfectly fine. However, if we try to insert it without aligning it, it will not go in. Only when we align it with the circle, it will go in smoothly. And so once it's aligned, we turn it, and it will lock in. And once it's locked in, it will not move out of place or be disconnected. However, we just do have to be careful when we're removing it. We have to push in, apply a little pressure to push it in, this metal connector part, push it into the terminal and turn. If you don't, it might require a little bit more force to turn it without pushing it in, but if you push it in a little bit, it's a lot easier. So now this cable you have seen in your kit, this cable is for signal output. This will be using to put signals onto the circuit. So generally the red lead is where the signal will be coming from, and the black lead is for ground. And you will see that this cable has the same type of connection that the oscilloscope probe has. It has the same type of grooves right here. And we're going to be inserting it the same way. However, when we're connecting it to the BNC adapter, we're going to want to make sure that we're inserting it on the W1 or the W2 terminals, the waveform generator terminals. These are output terminals. And as you can see, it has that same dot that we saw on the oscilloscope probes terminal. So now we're just going to align it in the same way, insert it, and twist it, and it will click into place. And it should not be able to remove, but if we did want to remove it, we'd remove it in the same manner as we did with the oscilloscope probe. So in this part of the video, I just want to talk about how we handle our oscilloscope probes and signal cables. Now for the oscilloscope probes, after we're done using them, the way we fold them is we put them in a loop like this. And the reason I emphasize on the way we loop them, or after we're done using them, is because we need to get familiar with how we handle equipment, especially equipment that's used for measuring signals. Because if we're using more sensitive cables or probes in the lab, we do not want to handle them incorrectly. And for example, the way that can be incorrect to fold or loop these probes is that we don't want to be handling them like this, where they're in a tight loop. So just for your own knowledge, we just want to keep them in a loose loop, and that's it. This way we don't damage the cable, but that generally covers how we handle oscilloscope probes. Now, signal cables are a little different because they are a little bit more rugged, much thicker wire, and less sensitive, since they are only outputting signals to the circuit. But in the same manner that we handle oscilloscope probes, we should handle signal cables. Now, that's all I wanted to present to you about handling and caring for probes and cables. Thank you.